Thank you very much. For those of you who know me, you'll know my career in semiconductors started in 1962 when I elected to study electronic engineering for my degree. Now, back then, the industry was under $1 billion in size, 350 million pounds. That's only about £1 million a day. It was a transistorized world, and state-of-the-art was a 4-transistor DTL flip-flop. So we've come a long way since that time there. I started Future Horizons in 1989, 30-odd years ago, and one of the keys to our enduring ability to keep going, I think, has not just been to simply focus on the data and the analysis of the data, but also our forensic analysis of the trends in the industry, what drives it, and how that impacts different companies. And it's that aspect that I want to talk about today, not the data particularly, but on some of these fundamental trends. Now, you're an intellectual bunch here, so I'm going to start off with a bit of poetry reading from a poem by John Donne, written 400 years ago. The title of the poem was "No Man is an Island Entire of Himself." Now, the message he was getting across in that poem is that human beings, individuals, do not work at their best individually on their own. They work much better when they're collaborating in cooperation, in partnership with other people. So that whole concept was really one of saying we cannot isolate ourselves from the rest of the world, from our community. We are a part of the whole, and we are at our best when we integrate with that. And my first rule of the semiconductor industry is based on that. No chip firm, no startup, no individual, no organization is also an island either. Like it or not, we are all part of the global semiconductor market. A $550 billion market, of which Europe, unfortunately, as a whole, is only about 7% of that total, around $44 billion. The second rule is to do with the market pull. Now, the market pull is 1,000 times stronger than any technology push. And no device, no invention, however ingenious, can survive without a market. That's not my quote. That comes from page 3 of this book. Now, this book, if you don't read any other book on the industry, grab a copy of this and read it. It has such immense pearls of wisdom in here. And on page 3, right at the beginning, was that statement. The book was written by Ernst Brown and Stuart McIndoll. What is more important about that is these are academics. They weren't marketeers, they weren't business people, they weren't from the industry. They were academics, people who were writing about the impact of the semiconductor technology on the economy and on sociology. And that was one of the first statements they made on the importance of looking at the technology from a market perspective and not from a research perspective. We firmly believe in that, and we've been working with startups over a long period of time, and we've written various guidelines for them. One of them is our value test. But the biggest question we ask them is, what is your market? How big is it? Who's going to buy it? Who's the competition? How are you going to outsmart the competition? What are your barriers to entry? Why should anyone want to buy from you? Now, these are very basic questions, okay? But you'd be surprised how many companies can't answer them. They don't know what their market is. They don't know what their USP is. They tell you all about the wonders of the technology, but they don't understand what is going to make that customer buy from you. And that's one of the most important aspects of that. I'm going to be very upsetting to the technologists here because I think the technology is the easy bit. It's just applied science. Once you understand the science, you can figure out how to do it. Most startups fail through poor marketing and not through bad ideas. And one of the keys to the skill shortage is not to get more technicians and engineers and things like that. Of course, you need those people there. You've got to make your company so beautiful, they want to fall in love with you. They'll fight the doors to work for you. If you make your companies attractive, you won't have a skill shortage. Does Apple have a skill shortage? Does Google have a skill shortage? Does Facebook have a skill shortage? No, because they attract the best engineers, and it leaves the rest of you with a skill shortage because, frankly, they don't love you. Number 3, the industry constants. Ignore these at your peril. The first real industry constant which springs to mind and has been very visible for a long time is the number of integrated circuits, the revenue per wafer, per square centimeter of silicon is constant. It has been constant for 40, 50 years, since the beginning of the integrated circuit industry. So yeah, Moore's law kicks in, we have more complex integrated circuits, we shrink chips down to reduce their cost, we keep the chip size constant and give you more functionality. The net result is zero. They balance each other out. The revenue you get from semiconductor production is $9 a square centimeter, and that's it. Now, it varies from technology to technology, but the average has been constant for a long period of time. The value chain, this is another important contract here. Obviously, the equipment and materials industry is feeding into the manufacture of the semiconductors, 550 billion, but that feeds into the electronic equipment industry, which then feeds into the service-related industry, which of course then feeds the economy there. Now, that value chain follows Sutton's law, follow the money. You know, if you want to get more money from your own section of that business there, you have to move up the value chain. You have to tap into the resources that are there. And that explains why companies like Apple are so good at designing chips, because their market base is $25 trillion. The semiconductor market base is 550. It's a fraction of the size that Apple has to call on to fund the R&D, to design beautiful, sexy integrated circuits. And the industry, the semiconductor industry, can't possibly spend that much amount of money. The reward for doing it, I mentioned $9 per square centimeter for the semiconductor guys. If you're a foundry, you only get $4. So poor TSMC, that the whole world depends upon, gets $4 a square centimeter. You put a bit of plastic around it, you get double that amount. Oh, if I was TSMC, I'd be very tempted to change my business model. Because for a bit of plastic, I double my revenue. But you also lose all your customers, so you have to be a bit careful how you do that there. If you're in the IP business, 10 cents. That's all you're going to get. Don't pretend you'll get 20, 30, 40, 50. You won't. Your budget is 10 cents. These are quantum layers. They're barriers. They will get there. If you want more money, move up the chain. Government-funded R&D support on its own never works, okay? You've got to have it with a customer-driven type of technology. And that's the one thing why a lot of the initiatives around the world have always failed to deliver, because they don't look at it from a top-down perspective. But if you don't, you need the customers, you need the scale to generate sufficient profits to fund the future R&D, because no government, no organization in the world can fund that amount of research from the bottom up alone. And we heard today that the government's going to put in a few million, but they're looking for industry to put in the billions and the trillions, okay? Well, that's where it's going to come from. It's got to come top down, and they won't do it unless there's a market in it for them. There's profit in it for them that they can make their money. Every single startup needs an end market sugar daddy, a business partner, a proposition out there. ARM had Nokia. IBM, or Intel had IBM. TSMC today has Apple. They have 50 times the investment proposition potential than any chip company can. You've got to find an end customer that will drive your research activity there, and then the rest becomes a very easy task. Fourth rule, the industry is cyclical. Now, I've lost count of the number of intellectual arguments I've listened to over the time about why scale and geographic diversity and market breadth and all that kind of stuff there is smoothing out the ups and downs. That has absolutely nothing to do with it. The industry is cyclical because there is a fundamental mismatch between supply and demand. Talk to the economists, they'll talk pigs and cobwebs, okay? These are fundamental economic concepts. Demand is very poorly visible, highly volatile, with very unreliable forecasts. You don't know what you need to make. No one can tell you what they want. Whereas the supply fundamentals are cast in concrete, long production cycles, 4 to 6 months minimum, long capacity lead times, 3 years, up to 3 years. So you're trying to build these monographous factories there to chase a market. You have no idea what it is. So it's only now that we're really starting to find, people talk about partnerships, no one actually does it apart from maybe TSMC, but you've got to recognize the fact that it is cyclical. You've also got to recognize that overshoot both ways and corrections are inevitable. The only uncertainty is when. So right now we're partying, we've got champagne in a few hours' time. Great, enjoy it. The only issue I have is this meeting should have been in Hawaii. You know, back in the day, it would have been in Hawaii. But anyway, now we have to settle for London, but the champagne is champagne. So it will crash sometime, most likely in the middle of this year. The fifth rule, best is irrelevant, okay? Only first and good enough works, okay? Get your product out to market, fix it on the run. Your customers will take a long time to find out where the bugs are. And by the time they find out where the bugs are, you've already got the fix, so you become the hero. So you create yourself a nice little image there of looking after your customers there. But getting it out to market is the most important thing. First is best. Now then, of course, we all know none of this stuff applies to the UK. Okay, because the UK is different. We have fantastic research, we have wonderful technology, and the world is going to beat a path to us, wanting to collaborate with us and wanting to make us successful. Well, wrong. Okay, this is one of the classic UK conundrums. The UK is just a tiny cog in the global wheel. Okay, we talked about Europe only being 7% of the total semiconductor market. Well, the UK is an even smaller part of that. Okay, so it has to look, any strategy that you guys develop has got to be a top-down, market-driven strategy. ARM had to outsmart Intel and Motorola. Everybody said they couldn't do it. They did, and they were very successful. ASML had to outsmart Nikon and Canon, and they struggled in the beginning. It was very, very hard. They found a way, they did it, and now they are the king. And IMEC, again, had to outsmart IBM. IBM was the premier research center. It had to be outsmarted. IMEC did it. They are now the center of gravity for the world's semiconductor research. So it can be done if you do it with the right perspective. What we have to figure out, the UK has to figure out, is how are we going to counter IMEC, TSMC, Global Foundries, ST Infineon, Cree, Taiwan, China? How are we going to outsmart these guys? Because that's the challenge, not the technology. The technology is easy. Outsmarting these guys here is the real big problem that we have to face. In the 80s, the US had a similar problem. They were under threat from Japan, and that threat was very serious. The leaders of industry at that time, Corrigan, Noyce, Rogers, Sanders, Spork, they marched up to Capitol Hill, they banged on the door, they got attention. Okay? They didn't go cap in hand, though, asking for support. They had a plan. They laid the plan on the table and told the government what had to be done. Within months of that meeting there, Sematech was formed, and not only was Sematech formed, it was headed up by Bob Noyce, who was the CEO of Intel. He took over the job of running it as chairman of Sematech. That's commitment from industry for you. And it was very successful. The question I ask is, who are the equivalent UK industry leaders that are going to march up to Downing Street and bang on Boris Johnson's door? And also, what plan are they going to be taking to him? What are they going to tell him that he has to do for industry? And it's not funding research, by the way. Okay, it's got to have a bigger vision than that. About a year or so ago, there was a UK-Taiwan technology showcase. It was a virtual event. And there were some members there from Taiwan, ITRI there, and they showed up the mission statement that ITRI had back in 1973 when it was founded. Their mission statement, 3 simple statements. Don't do research for research's sake. It must have market potential. Provide a bridge between academic and industry and help Taiwan's industry reach fruition. Now, they'd obviously read this book here because that's pretty much textbook what that book says. The UK's version of that mission statement was, we are open for cooperation. Now, I'm sorry, but I mean, yes, cooperation is important, okay, but I think it rather missed the point, okay? And that's what please don't repeat that straight there. I mean, is that really the best that UK Semiconductor Limited can do? We are open for cooperation. That's like being open to be pillaged. Okay, that's it. Thanks very much. End of the thing there. And if I want to leave quietly by that door before you throw the tomatoes, that's good. If not, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Malcolm.